Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I am so happy you're here. I'm a patient living with an ultra rare disease. I am only one of 20 other people in the world with my condition. This podcast aims to amplify the voices of those living with rare disease, chronic illness, disabilities, and many other diseases in our world, and to tell their stories and the stories of those who love them. So sit back and take a listen. Hello and welcome back to the One of 20 podcast. Today I am joined by Patricia Medlin, who is Wyatt's mom, and Wyatt has Pyruvate Dehydrogenase complex deficiency. And I'm so excited to share Wyatt's story today, telling stories of people, especially young people who are not even of the age of 10 is so important to me because I was once them. And Patricia, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you. I'm so excited as well.
Awesome. So I want to know, what is your story with rare disease? I know I introduced Wyatt's condition and I introduced you, but what is Wyatt's condition and what has your journey looked like with rare disease?
Wyatt's condition is very unique in that it's a mitochondrial metabolic disease, and we didn't really know about it until right around his second birthday. So basically, his body cannot process vitamin B1. This all first started, I guess we'll start there because it's very complicated, long story. Basically, we went on vacation, a happy vacation to Florida. And on the way home, we stopped in Georgia for the night at a hotel. And we started walking towards the elevator, and he would just collapse every 2 or 3 steps. He was about one and almost two, a couple of weeks shy from two. So he was able to walk for at least a year at that point. So we thought, like, that's really odd. You know, he's normally a crazy little toddler. What's going on? We were like, oh my gosh, 15 hours or something from home, and we were driving. So we called the pediatrician all the way back here. We live in Pittsburgh, and we had to drive all the way here to go to a pediatrician, which was, he was throwing up in the car. I mean, it was a very long 15 hours or so. And, you know, they dismissed us at the pediatrician's office saying, because he had croup, which is a common childhood virus, that, oh, this was a post-viral response to croup. And, you know, as a parent, you always kind of second guess and think like, okay, like, you know, doctors, they call them practicing physicians, because in my personal opinion, there's, you know, everyone is, we're still just best medical guess we can give. And in our opinion, we just didn't quite agree. So we got a second opinion at Children's Hospital, and the neurologist saw him. And even they said the same thing, this is post-viral. But, you know, I believe parent power is something real, and you feel it's not right. So we pushed for a brain MRI because we thought neurologically something was wrong with his legs. He just couldn't walk. And they did a brain MRI, and they came back and apologized a million times. He was found to have bilateral brain lesions in his basal ganglia, specifically his globus pallidus, which is the part of your brain that can make your legs walk forward. If you didn't have that brain, part of your brain functioning, or in Wyatt's case, all of the cells are, they said, not damaged, they are dead on both parts of his brain. So what happens is he kind of walks like he has like spaghetti noodles for legs, or like he is drunk. And when you are drunk, that part of your brain kind of can't really walk straight. So when Wyatt has those episodes, that part of the brain is not functioning, and he gets really wobbly and will start collapsing. That was how it all started for us. And then we were admitted straight to ICU. And from there, it kind of spiraled. They did so many testing. Then after neurology couldn't figure it out, they actually had an entire medical conference with the top doctors of all of UPMC, which is a huge medical facility. And they had a conference over Zoom with all these doctors on like live video Zoom watching Wyatt walk. No one had ever seen a brain MRI like his before. And we had the top doctors that they could contact. And that's kind of where we were left. So they did a genetic test, and then we had to just wait. And it has taken us about a year and a half to finally get the diagnosis that we have. But that's pretty much most of the story.
I really enjoy hearing the stories about how people came to their conclusion because something that you had mentioned in the story was about mom powers. And my mom and I were literally just talking about this 5 minutes before we started recording. And she had something very similar. My timeline was very similar to Wyatt's. I was about 20 months old, so very similar. And my mom had this mom instinct as well. She called it a mom power where she was like, well, the doctor said that they noted in your chart that I was breastfeeding you too much and that I was spoiling you too much. And she was like, I knew I wasn't. She was very adamant on that. And her instincts were correct. And at 20 months, I went into a coma, and one thing led to another. And I ended up being diagnosed with a rare disease. So I think that is very, very, very true that parents have instincts because you're raising these children. You spend every day with them. The doctors see you for what, 10, 15, 20 minutes. So I am very, very pleased to hear that you obviously it's not what you wanted to hear, but it's something that you just knew that was happening essentially. And what is there treatment for Wyatt's condition? I know you mentioned prior to this that there might be gene therapy. Does he get services? What does that all look like? What now you have the diagnosis? What does his care look like?
So as of right now, there it's I want to say they consider it a like air quotes treatment, but it doesn't really necessarily treat the disease. So like if you think like cancer, there's like chemotherapy, or there's like hemophilia, there's like all kinds of things. Like there's I think it's called factor, or but with this one, there's a thing called the ketogenic diet. And when we first heard it, we were like, oh, keto, like adults do that to lose weight. But the ketogenic diet is a little different. It's basically like the keto diet for adults, but much more strict and intense. And the keto diet is like really, really high fat and then really low, almost no carbs or sugars. And it's very unusual because the reason that this works, and bear with me because I'm not a doctor myself, but the way that this works is pyruvate complex deficiency is where your brain lacks pyruvate, and that's what we need to keep our brain working and healthy and to process carbohydrates to get energy. If we don't have pyruvate like these kids have, then eating sugars and carbs does us no good because we need that in the pyruvate to have energy. So instead, what we do is if we eat really low carbs and really high fats, it actually tricks our brain into processing energy differently, and we can completely bypass the need for pyruvate altogether. Therefore, it makes it so our body doesn't rely on the pyruvate that they don't have. So this ketogenic diet, all it really does is slow the progression. And it's still, I want to say it's proven, but it's also still in some doctors questionable. But most of us do the ketogenic diet because it's kind of, I want to say, like the best chance we have, or the best like outcome and hope that we have right now is the ketogenic diet. It really is not fun for kids. Wyatt is in the process of transitioning to it right now. He loves cheeseburgers and mac and cheese and cake, and he at 3.5, almost 4. I mean, it's hard to tell a child that old that you can't have your favorite foods anymore. And how do you explain to him that like this is going to potentially save your brain? It's really hard because this disease is also neurodegenerative. So the whole idea is to slow progression, and each kid is different. That's what we've been told by every doctor is they can't tell us a timeline. They can't tell us what to expect. They can't even tell us what could happen tomorrow or if he'll live 20 years. I mean, we have no idea. So all we can do is everything to potentially slow whatever progression could be going on that we can't really see. And it's terrifying. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going on inside his body. I mean, there's still so much out there that the doctors really don't even know. And I mean, we're the ones kind of telling them at this point. So it's really hard, but that's what the diet is essentially for. And that's really it. Some people take vitamin B1, and Wyatt takes that. He has taken that for almost 2 years. The most interesting thing about the vitamin B1 is when he was in the hospital the very first time, they sent us home and they completely missed the fact that he had undetectable levels of vitamin B1 in his system, which is actually almost impossible. Vitamin B1 is so common, it's found in almost everything you eat, that even countries that are completely like, that they don't have any food and that these kids are almost starving, even they don't have low B1 because it's in like rice and like all pretty much cereal. I mean, everything you could eat. So they were like completely shocked and didn't really know what to do. Then it turns out the second time he was admitted, about a month later, they overloaded him with so much B1, and that was all he needed. And he was like back to himself. He could walk again. He needed the B1 because his body couldn't absorb or process it. So that's the other treatment. Well, progression slowing treatment is B1. So Wyatt takes 150 milligrams of B1 a day. An average adult only needs 1 milligram of B1. And that's how much Wyatt at 3.5 just takes 150. And his doctor wants to up it to 300, which is 300 times the amount an adult needs on a daily basis. So those are the really two options we have to slow the disease, but otherwise there is no cure and no real treatment for it other than treating the symptoms.
Thank you so much for sharing, because it's really important to kind of share when people talk about like rare disease or medical complexities or whatever it may be. Sometimes we don't like to talk about the ugly stuff. We don't like to talk about this, that, and the next. And a point that you brought up that I found really interesting is Wyatt's diet, because I personally, I'm in the polar opposite diet because my body doesn't process fats. I'm on a high carb, low fat diet. So that is very, very interesting that Wyatt's on a high fat, low carb diet. Because when my body, part of one of the components is when I eat fat food. So like if I went out and had like McDonald's, for example, like if I had a McDonald's cheeseburger, I eat the cheeseburger and all of that fat builds up on my liver. The liver doesn't wash it out. It doesn't break it down. It just stays there. So for me, I'm on a low fat, high carb diet, and it's just so interesting to see how he also has a rare disease like I do, but he's on a completely different diet. And I, again, want to thank you so much for sharing all of that, because it's really important to know all that goes into rare disease. And especially the part when I was reading your story and I was reading about the condition, I noticed that B1 was something that was a big, big component of the condition. And with all of that being said, since you said that Wyatt, when you initially found that something was wrong and then you went to the doctors and you did that daunting drive home, was with his legs, does he get services like physical therapy and occupational therapy? Or now that you're treating it and trying to slow it down, has his symptoms with his spaghetti legs, essentially, has that slowed down as well? And what is like treatment to kind of help him fine tune his gross motor skills look like?
So it's really kind of interesting. So how it works now, we have been told that what damage is done to his brain is done essentially. And the part that is damaged, the globus pallidus, is, as they said in the not nice terms, but those cells are dead cells. There is no bringing them back. So at this point, what happens is, so he will wake up in the morning and his legs are tired. Like that part of the brain hasn't really woken up yet. So they're kind of noodly in the morning. And then what happens is, because he's so young, they said under the age of 5 specifically, his brain is still developing. So what has happened is the healthy part of his brain, because there's so much of the brain we haven't even used as humans yet, And the healthy part has reassigned almost another part of his brain to then take over during the day. So during the day, once he's awake and he's functioning, his legs work basically not normal, but neurotypical, right? He's walking fine. And then if he is exhausted or tired, or if he tries to jump at the trampoline park, his legs will become very fatigued very quickly. And what happens is that healthy part of the brain's like, all right, I'm tired now. And it kicks back over to the damaged part of his brain. And then once that happens from the exhaustion, you see the noodle legs again. So then we have to sit him down and he'll rest for a little bit. And then once, that the healthy part is like back and ready to go, it'll kick back over and his legs will be fine again. So we've kind of learned to just notice almost that if he's tired, we'll start to see his legs kind of buckle, and we'll see him fall a little bit. And I'm like, okay, your leggies are tired. Let's take a break. And he knows what that means because he can feel his legs tired, but he doesn't understand yet what he has or anything like that. So he'll just sit down till he feels ready and he'll try again, and then they're fine. So for the most part, he doesn't really have services because his legs themselves are okay. Like, they're really strong. Trust me, he's kicked me many times having toddler tantrums. They are very strong legs. Um, it's mostly just this weird game of ping pong almost that his brain plays from when one part gets tired, and then it kind of kicks back to the other part. And that's kind of what we've learned to live with. The hardest part, I will say, is you never know when those falls are going to happen. You never really know when all of a sudden he's going to hit exhaustion and start collapsing. It's happened on pavement, it's happened next to furniture and like all kinds of crazy stuff. And that's probably the most difficult part of our day-to-day life, is just, oh, Wyatt's tired, his legs are falling, go catch him, like hurry, don't let him fall into a wall. Or that's probably the most difficult part for us right now. Thankfully it hasn't progressed further. He has a lot of things upcoming, but that's like the biggest issue for us right now.
That is very interesting to hear how it's like one moment, from what I understand, it's like one moment he's fine, and then once his legs become noodly, it's just very interesting to see how that progresses and how that happens. And I know he's at such a young age, how do you explain it to him in terms that he'll understand? Because we as adults can compartmentalize things as they are, but with kids, and you know this, you have to explain them things in a certain way. How did you explain to him initially, like, if your legs get tired, like, do X, Y, and Z? Or like, are you kind of still in the process of, as he grows up, kind of explaining to him what his body encounters?
So we're still trying to explain as age appropriately as we can. And I think the biggest thing for us is that, as odd as it is, I actually was diagnosed with the same rare disease as him. So for like 7 or 8 years before I had gotten pregnant, I had been going through my own medical journey of really strange things happening. And with adults, they don't really, I don't want to say they don't care as much about adults, right? Because obviously they care, but they don't go to the extent for testing. They usually just send you to another specialist and another specialist. And with Wyatt, they were like right away to genetic testing. For adults, it's a much longer, complicated process. So I had been just circling around a specialist for years, and all they would ever say is something is wrong, but we don't know what it is. So then once Wyatt was born and he went through his stuff, a lot of his symptoms were extremely similar to mine. Like almost like half of them were overlapping, and the doctors were like, that's a little strange, like, something is going on. So when they genetically tested the whole family, me and Wyatt both have the same genetic mutation. There's actually two of them, and they both came from me. So they determined I actually have disease in 80% of my cells. They did an X inactivation test, which, okay, this is really interesting, but girls have two X's and boys have an X and a Y. And in X-linked genes, like diseases, or X-linked diseases, they're typically not shown or not prevalent in women because we have two X's, but we are usually carriers, and we could give a disease to a boy because we give him our X, one of our X's. However, there are situations where X inactivation occurs, and every woman or every baby, I guess, goes through that, every female baby, and when they're in the womb. And usually the diseased X will basically turn off, and the healthy X will be the one that turns on. It is a phenomenon scientists don't understand how our body knows to do that, but that's usually what happens. We still carry that disease X, which is why we are carriers, but usually not symptomatic. However, there's a weird phenomenon called skewed X inactivation. And what happens is, in a very, very small, rare population, which of course happens to be me, it will be called skewed X activation, where that diseased X, the one that should be off, is actually turned on in a portion of your cells. And they do a test, X inactivation analysis, and they can determine how many of your cells have which one turned on and which one turned off. And in my case, 80% of the diseased, or the cells in my body, have the disease, and 20% do not. So I actually have the disease as well, but mine is not as bad as Wyatt, because Wyatt is 100%, because he only has one X and his is diseased. So that's kind of complicated, but that's basically how that happened. So I usually explain the whole, back to the whole legs thing. I usually tell him that mommy's legs are tired too, because my legs also get tired just like his. So he usually thinks that he's just like mommy, and sometimes we both sit down, or I say, oh, you got that from mommy, and then he'll just take a break. But that's kind of how we've been explaining it, is that like, oh, that's a mom thing, you get that from mom, until he can understand more medical stuff. Sorry, it was a lot, I know.
That's perfect. I absolutely loved hearing about how you kind of found out that you had your own rare disease, because I know personally, for me, just to relate in some sense, is that my rare disease is also genetic. And we did not really know the name of it or anything until we got genetic testing, but my insurance did not cover genetic testing by any means until 2019. So that was about 19 years after my initial diagnosis. And then when we found out what I had, it turns out that my parents were both carriers of the disease, and that's how they gave it to me. My siblings did not get it. My sister is a carrier, but it's just very interesting, one, how genetic testing can really like give you a lot of answers, and two, it's for you personally. I really appreciate you sharing that. And how do you think, with everything the Wyatt has been through, do you think that if he never got the disease, and whatever that may have looked like, do you think that with genetic testing and modern medicine now, do you think you would have been able to find an answer, or do you think you would have just been under the impression that you're still not sure what you have?
So oddly enough, I have thought about the same question myself many times. And I don't think I would have ever gotten an answer. In fact, it took me, oh God, like 11 or 12 years to get pregnant. And they told me I would never get pregnant, that my body just, for whatever reason, couldn't do it. I would never be able to have kids. And then when I finally did, it was like a miracle. We were just shocked that it even happened. And then I had a super complicated pregnancy, and all kinds of stuff. And I always say that, like, I am doing everything I can to save Wyatt. Like I like go crazy with advocacy, and like I call doctors so much that I annoy them until they call me back. But in the reality, like most of the time, I think Wyatt saved me. I mean, we're like basically a team. Like we're in this together, and I just, I don't think I would have ever gotten the answer. I have had genetic testing done on my own without Wyatt. So basically, like a doctor that doesn't know that Wyatt has this specific disease. And it has come back and not shown the genetic change in my PDH1 gene. And the reason is when they do those exome tests, they only test genes that that doctor feels is relevant to what they think the diseases that you could have. And with Wyatt, they automatically thought PDHA, the pyruvate, because the part of the brain that was damaged can only be damaged in very specific situations. And one of them is metabolic diseases, specifically this one. That's the only way that you could get that part bilaterally damaged like that. So with him, he had much more severe symptoms, which narrowed it down. For me, the doctors, when they cast their net out into the world of genetics, they didn't consider this disease. So that when that genetic test came back, it didn't show the mutation, even though it exists, because they didn't test that gene. But because, it's a spectrum, and not everyone with pyruvate dehydrogenase has the same symptoms. Some are very mild and some are very severe. And I don't think it would have ever shown if he didn't go through what he went through.
That's so interesting to hear that they only test for what they see fit. And you think they test for the whole panel, like everything that they can. And I never knew that. So that's like very interesting to me. And are you on the same diet now that you have some answers? Are you on the same diet as Wyatt, or are you on a similar diet? Like, what does that look like?
I try to monitor it, but I am not on the same diet. And they told me the reason is my symptoms are not as severe. And the hard part with the diet is, while it does help to slow disease progression, in some ways it can also be harmful to your body. So depending on how severe your symptoms are, it could be more beneficial. There's levels of the ketogenic diet. Some are on a very less strict, some are on a 4-to-1, which means 4 times as much fat per carbs or something like that. I mean, it's very intense. So for me personally, they told me, again, it's more about treating the symptoms. So they said, because I already have peripheral neuropathy and all these weird GI problems and all this stuff, they said that damage has already essentially been done and it's not going to reverse. So for them, they said, given that I'm 32 and I don't have brain damage and I don't have the weird blood levels and stuff that Wyatt has, they said that I'm okay to just monitor myself. But I still see neurology and all these other specialists to just treat the symptoms that arise that are caused by the pyruvate dehydrogenase. So it's really interesting how our journeys are similar but very different. Wyatt has 2 hospitals, 2 different genetic teams, a group of researchers. I mean, he has so many people that I check in with almost weekly. And with me, I kind of just see this person here, that person there. It's very similar, but definitely different once you're an adult. So that's why when he's a child and can get all the help he can, I try to advocate as much as possible for him, so that before he is an adult and hits the adult world of doctors, that he gets all the special help that he can now.
I really relate to the part where you said he has specialists and things like that, because I also have specialists. I have my geneticist, my GI doctor. I have all these different doctors. So I think it's extremely interesting how, even though in the rare disease community, even though people don't have similar symptoms or similar diseases or whatever the case may be, that specialists and teams are a common denominator with all of us, because we all need care and we all have very specific things. And I've been seeing my geneticist for, it's going to be 22 years this winter. So it's very, very, very interesting. And shifting gears a little bit on a lighter note, what is Wyatt like? What's his personality? I know you have an Instagram, and I know I saw that John Deere had commented, and what's his personality like?
Okay, Wyatt is, we always say, he is his own vibe. He is his own person. He is wild. I mean, we did this superhero project, and they created a superhero for him, and they literally named him Wyatt Wild. I mean, he loves tractors. He loves superheroes, tools. I mean, he is the boy of boys, and he is just, I mean, he's crazy. I love him to death, but whew, that kid, he runs as much as he can with his legs anyway. He runs and runs and runs and runs. And he just loves life. Honestly, he will do anything. He will go anywhere. He will try anything. That's my favorite thing about him. He's not shy. He will, say, hey, how are you? Do you like my cowboy boots? And he'll tell you all about them, whether you want to hear it or not. That's my favorite thing is honestly, he just loves life. Like every day, even when I wake up and I am miserable as can be and I didn't sleep all night, he wakes up and he goes, it's morning time. And he loves it. And that's the best thing about him. So we have reached out to John Deere and they reached back to us, sent Wyatt a box of all kinds of surprises. We reached out to Milwaukee and Milwaukee Tool sent him a whole box of like surprises and t-shirts. And then we actually reached out to his favorite country music singer, Davis Luce. And he sent Wyatt a video of him singing his favorite song and saying hi to Wyatt. And I kid you not, he's actually coming here in August to Pittsburgh to come play just for Wyatt and come play him a song and all of that. So, I mean, it's really, really cool.
That's absolutely wonderful. I know when I saw everything on Instagram, I got a big smile on my face because when you have a rare disease, it can be very difficult day to day, even at a young age, being like 3 or 4, because you don't necessarily know what's going on with your body. You know what your parents tell you and you know what you observe, but you really just know the basics. And it's really great that he has like John Deere and Milwaukee and his favorite country singer. And it just I know you can't see me, but I know I had the biggest smile on my face because it's moments like that where it's like, okay, like, even though like I don't have the easiest stack of cards, it's like, this is good. Like, it's just very heartwarming. And what are you doing I know you keep mentioning the word advocate, and I know you're constantly in contact with his doctors and you're advocating. What does your advocacy look like? How are you advocating now that you're on Instagram with Wyatt Wild, and what does that all look like?
So, this is my soft spot, but basically, for me personally, when it comes to like advocacy and awareness and everything, before like I guess my life was flipped upside down by rare disease and stuff, you would always see these like posters and signs that say like, cancer awareness or like, all kinds of this word awareness, and you're like, okay, like, I'm aware, I see the poster, like I get it, I'm aware. But then when you become a parent and you have a child that has a disease that nobody's ever heard of, that you didn't even hear of until it happened to you, and then you think to yourself, like, you understand more of what this whole awareness means. And it's not just so that people can have, t-shirts and keychains that say it. It's so that, when you call a doctor and you say, and they say, what medical conditions does he have? And you tell them he has pyruvate dehydrogenase complex deficiency. And they say, oh, what's that? You think to yourself, I'm not the doctor. Like, I shouldn't have to tell you what it is, and it's not their fault. It's that there's not even a whole lot of literature about it. And that to me is what awareness is. It's so that when I call a doctor and I tell them what disease my child has, they say, oh, okay, yeah, I have heard of that before. Or you tell another friend's mom, my child can't have that candy because he can't have carbs and sugar. He has pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. They don't say, oh my gosh, what's that? They say, oh yeah, I have heard of that. I've seen something before. That is awareness. It's just so people can, your child isn't excluded from things or looked at differently or looked at as a science project. He's a human. He's a 3-year-old who likes toys and tractors. I mean, it's just being aware of what it is and being aware of how to help or the right questions to ask. And that for me is what I mostly want to advocate for, is that just the whole awareness of it. And the other part is I'm on the board of a really amazing foundation called Hope for PDCD. And I'm trying my best to help them raise funds. We are putting together a mullet march 4K or 5K, I'm sorry, here in Pittsburgh. Wyatt has a mullet, which he is very proud of his mullet. He will not let me cut it. He loves it beyond more than anything in the world. So we were trying to put together a mullet march where if you would like to participate, that all of the runners or walkers will have mullets, and if not, we are going to like ask you wear a mullet wig or something mullet wise. That's Wyatt's thing. So we're trying to raise money for that to help find a cure for gene therapy. I'm doing everything I possibly can. That's what the Instagram was about. I wanted to reach out to these companies and just say, hey, like, this is a thing. This is what's going on. Like, this is real, be aware. Like, that's kind of what really the whole thing is about.
The mullet right. Oh my God. That I'm definitely going to be sharing that when that happens on my Instagram because one, I think the concept is hilarious, but I also think it's like very important where everybody has their own thing. And I think mullets is like a very unique thing to have, but I also think it's a brilliant thing to have. And speaking of brilliance, I really admire your perspective on advocacy because I've always thought of it like that, but I've never been able to articulate it the way you did. So thank you for that because it's really important. And I know having a rare disease, because I went through my whole childhood having a rare disease, just like Wyatt. And my mom was the CEO of having pamphlets and having like, she was like, I don't know, she was like a quick fun fact person. Like, this is my son's condition. This is how you treat it, this, that, and the next. And she always went above and beyond advocating for me and advocating for people who fall under my condition because you're right, we're human beings, we're not another statistic, we're not a science project, we're not a case study, we're a human being. We participate in everyday society, whatever that may look like. And it's just really important to emphasize that because even now, I'll never forget, I went to a new doctor. Unfortunately, I'm not in pediatrics anymore, which it's a fine transition, but it wasn't my favorite transition because I loved being in pediatrics. It was a safe place. I had the same doctors forever and ever. So it just kind of was routine for me. And I went to a new doctor outside of my network, just closer to home, because a majority of my physicians are about 45 minutes away, like right outside of New York City. And I live in Connecticut. So I went to this new doctor locally, and they're a fine doctor. They're very highly rated. But I went and I said, I went without my mom for the first time ever without a doctor's appointment at 21 years old. And I said, hey, like, listen, this is my rare disease. These are this is what it entails. My mom packed me a pamphlet and I just want you to look at it. Like, can you just so you know? And I was going to have a procedure done, a routine procedure, just to make sure that everything had looked good. And there are certain things when I go under anesthesia that I need. One of them is I can't fast because my body can't go without food and water. And the doctor just was not understanding that. And I knew in that moment he did not read the pamphlet. And I'm sure he's wonderful, but I ended up having to go back into my network because they understood my condition. And the advocacy part never goes away because you're always advocating for yourself. You're always saying, this is what I need. Instead of them asking, they should just be able to know, or they should be able to know about like the spectrum it falls under. So I totally echo and emphasize that completely.
Yeah, that's the hardest part. Like, like you said with your mom, like with the pamphlets, like as much as you don't want to have to do that, you have to. When you're a child that age, as like a mom or a dad or a parent that you have to speak for them, like just like any kid when they go to the pediatrician and they say like, oh, did you eat breakfast? They're like, no. And the mom's like, yes, you did. You had cereal. Like that's just they all say that. They're like, no, they don't feed me. I mean, that's what kids do. I mean, so we have to speak for them. And, and the biggest thing, what started all this for Wyatt when the first two doctors said, oh, it's just post viral. I just, another thing for me is if you don't know, it's okay to ask. But when you ask and we tell you, after work that day or something, go research it. Go be curious. Go say, like, oh, if I saw this kid, maybe I'll see another one that has this disease and I should familiarize myself, That's my biggest thing. And if you aren't sure as a doctor, don't dismiss a patient. If you really aren't sure or it could be something serious, I just my biggest thing is don't say it's just post-viral collapsing. I mean, that's crazy. Just say, like, I'm not sure, this could be something else. You should see someone else for this. That's another part for me that I think is really important. Is it's okay to say I don't know, but if you don't know, then familiarize yourself. And that's a big portion of it too.
100%, absolutely. Because even the top specialists, they're still doing their research, because learning, in my opinion, never ends, because you don't know everything. Even if you have your degree, you have a PhD, a master's, whatever it is in any subject, you're not done learning. And I would rather explain to my doctors, and I'm not talking like my geneticists, like the primary ones, like if I have to go see a new doctor, or if I have to go to the eye doctor, I am ready to explain, but I also want them to be like, okay, that's very interesting. Let me note that in my chart, rather than just saying, oh, okay, thanks for sharing, because I would rather only want to explain it once. And I'm not saying that from a place of being selfish and being lazy. It's just, I think as medical professionals, they should take the time and the investment to be like, hey, okay, he has a rare disease that only 20 people in the world have. This is what it's called. This is what it does. And we'll note it. So if we have a PCA or a medical assistant or a nurse or a fill-in doctor, they can look at his chart and be like, okay, they may not know all the answers, but they know the basic definition, what it does to my body, things of that nature.
Yes.
So that's really it. And I know as Wyatt gets older, you're probably going to experience the same things. It's very, very interesting. And wrapping all of this up, what resources do you have you learned, come across along the way for Wyatt's condition, for rare diseases in general? And I know that you had mentioned on our call before this that you are going to become a part of a board for gene therapy. So I would love to hear all about that.
As of right now, the biggest resource has honestly just been, as with rare diseases go, doctors, like you said, are still learning. They are literally called practicing physicians. And like I said, I think that's because they're always practicing, they're always learning. And for his disease, they still don't have a lot of answers. So the best thing that I've been doing is just networking with other parents through like social media. It's a small world, but it's a small little group of us parents, and we kind of just bounce off each other and feed off each other. And that's been one of the best resources for me. And through that, I met a friend. Her name is Frances, and their daughter Violet also has the same disease. And she and her husband didn't like the answers they got, which is basically there's no treatment and no cure. And they went on the journey to start a foundation called Hope for PDCD. And they are in the process of working with a university. They have a whole line of like world-renowned doctors, I mean, amazing doctors in on everything. They've got all of it ready to get started. We are still fundraising. They themselves have put in $50,000 of their own money to get it started. I think we're up to like $160,000 out of 250. So we're really putting in work to get fundraising started. Once we get it together, we will be doing gene therapy practicing, I believe, on like mice. But the goal is there's this gene therapy, I guess they have done, that has worked for several other diseases. And those diseases react in the same way that pyruvate dehydrogenase does. And they're fairly confident that this would actually also work for this disease. The problem is the mice is actually the hardest part, from my understanding. You have to breed the mice and they have to be so many months old before you can start the testing. But then it only works best on symptomatic mice, because then you have to make sure that it cures the symptoms. And that is, from my understanding, the longest and hardest part, aside from raising the crazy amount of money to get it done. So that has been, again, that's the only hope for a cure that we have right now. And I'm putting everything I have into it, because that's the best treatment option for Wyatt as he grows and gets older. Hopefully it becomes a reality and he's able to get that gene therapy. And if not, then I want it for future kids, because a lot of kids who have this disease don't live past, I think, the age of 3. And a lot of them don't live past infancy. They pass away before they can ever even get genetic testing done. And that to me is so important, that we get this gene therapy ready. We are both in the national history study for the disease. We are both doing everything we can to get it on the newborn screening, which we are, like I said, in the national study for that. So doing everything we can to save Wyatt and save other kids from going through what he's gone through.
Thank you so much for coming on today and being an advocate and being so open, because I know a lot of these topics aren't easy to discuss. They are very, very close and dear to who you are as a person, all rare disease patients, of what they go through. It can be very tricky and challenging. So I really want to thank you for your openness. And I am so looking forward to following along your journey. Wyatt just looks, from what you've told me and what I've seen on social media, it just looks like the best kid. It seems like he has such a bright future ahead, and that you and him, despite all of the obstacles you've had in your way, are kind of taking it with such a bright and positive approach. And I'm just so grateful and thankful that you're here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. There's one quote and one advice I have for any parent going through something similar, and it was always for me, was first we cried and now we work. And that's kind of what happened. The first time we got the news at the hospital, we were bawling our eyes out. And from that, after that moment, we have been put to work. And that's kind of how I'm able to talk about everything is like, okay, I cried, I got it out of my system, and now I need to be there for Wyatt. Now my head needs to be in the game, and I need to be prepared at all times for if something were to happen, I need to be ready to answer those questions. So now my mind is always in what's next, and that's kind of what's kept me going. It keeps me from getting upset. First I cried, now I work, and it really has helped me a lot. And I appreciate again you having me on the show today.
Thank you so much again, and can't wait to see what's ahead. Thank you so much for tuning in to the 1 of 20 podcast. I am so happy you listened. To find more content from the podcast, you can follow us on Instagram at 1 of 20 podcast. And to find more information on rare diseases, you can go to the National Organization of Rare Diseases, nord.org, and follow them on Instagram and all other social media channels. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be healthy, be safe, and do something good today.